So today we'll discuss the concept of object-oriented programming. Okay. So till now we created functions which are related to procedural-oriented programming. Okay. So now we'll
Yes.
discuss some basics of object-oriented programming. Okay. We are not going in detail into every topic. So we'll first see some basics of the object-oriented programming and we'll know in detail when we are creating that relevant object. Okay.
Okay.
So since we are able to achieve all the functionalities, we are able to write code in procedural oriented programming like functions. Why? ABAP introduced object oriented programming. So in the first place, ABAP can support both programming languages models, procedural oriented programming model, object oriented programming model. ABAP will support, ABAP can support both programming models. Okay. For example, C is the procedural or object oriented?
Procedural oriented
C++,
language, so object oriented.
object oriented, right? Yeah. So ABAP
Yes,
can
sir.
support both programming models, both the procedural and object oriented. Okay. In these days, in these recent times, so in most of the projects, only they're recommending object oriented programming model. Okay. So why they are recommending object oriented programming model? Why they are not considering procedural oriented programming model? So because there are certain advanced features in object oriented programming model, starting from data reusability to security of the data. Okay. So we have better options in object oriented programming. Anyone know the basics of object oriented programming?
Classes, objects,
Yeah.
inheritance,
Yes. Yeah. Inheritance, polymorphism,
polymorphism,
encapsulation.
encapsulation. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
these are these features of object-oriented programming. By using object-oriented programming, we can reduce the code redundancy. We can reduce the code redundancy. Okay. First feature is using class methods. We can create the reusable objects. Those are called class methods, just like function modules. Okay. So we have data abstraction and encapsulation. Data abstraction and encapsulation. Here, when we are using function modules, whatever the data you declared inside the function module, these are global. Anyone can access that data. But here in object-oriented programming model, we have a concept called access specifiers. That is called public, private, and protect. If you implement your functionality in public, other class methods, other classes can access that functionality. For example, if you implement your functionality inside the protect, what will happen? Only child classes are it comes to inheritance. Okay, whatever the child classes of that parent class can only use that functionality, whatever the functionality available in protect method, protect access specifier. What about private? If you define any functionality inside the private, only that is local to that
That
class.
class,
Any other
that
class
class
cannot
only
access that.
uses.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what is the another feature? Inheritance, right? What is
Yes,
inheritance?
sir.
Inheritance means, for example, you have one class with certain methods. So whatever the functionality available in that class can be reused by the child classes. Okay, whatever the functionality
Yes, sir.
available in that superclass can be reused by the subclasses. Here we call this as a superclass, and this is a subclass. So this comes into inheritance concept. So we have another concept of polymorphism. What is polymorphism? Polymorphism means using same class method. For example, there is a method name called save. So we can use same class method for different functionalities. So in one program we can implement one functionality, in another program we can implement a completely different functionality. But the method name is same, method is same. Okay, but it behaves differently in different programs. That is called polymorphism. Okay, so here what do we have here? What are the objects we are going to create in object oriented programming? Class. Inside the class what will be having?
Inheritance, private, public, and protected.
Inside the class we have methods and attributes. What you can find inside a class?
Methods,
Methods and
and
attributes.
attributes.
Okay, methods and attributes. So methods is similar to function modules. We can create a reusable object or reusable modularized object using class method. You can have importing and exporting parameters similar to the function module. Okay, you define importing and exporting parameters and you're going to implement the source code. Okay, but what is the additional option here in object oriented programming? We have attributes in the class. What are the attributes? Attributes so we have methods, right? In single class we might have multiple methods. So the data of the attributes can be accessible by the all the methods of the class. Okay, attribute is like just like a variable, work area, or internal table like structure. We can store data in the runtime. Okay, so that all the classes, all the methods of that class can access that attribute data. Clear? So it might be
It means
confusing, but
attributes only.
when we are working on the
It
class,
means
yes,
it only stores data, sir.
yes, okay. So when we are creating, you will get better knowledge on it. So let's start creating class methods. Okay. So whenever we are using that particular features of the object oriented programming, we will go we'll discuss more on that. Okay. So did we create any function modules earlier for any program? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Function modules. We created function group also since the demo underscore group.
Yes. So for example, we are calling function modules in different programs, right? We are calling function modules in different programs, right?
Yes, sir.
So after some time, I want to know. So wherever my function module is calling, so wherever my function module is calling, I want to know that. How can you do that? Go to SC37. I want to know what are all the programs or objects using my function module. For example, there is this function module. So I want to know which program is using this function module. What are all the different programs that is this function module is being called? How can you check that? So we have a concept called where user list. So you can use where user list to know the calling program of the function modules are classes, class methods, tables, data elements. You can apply where user list on all these objects. You can find out the programs. What are all the programs that are calling? Select the function module name and click on where user list and select the type of the object. So for example, I am selecting programs. Click on continue. So it will display all the programs which are calling this particular function module. Here we have only one program is calling this function module. That's why it is showing only one program. Click on it. So this is our program, right? That
Yes, sir.
is that function module is being called. Now, shall we replace this with the class method, object-oriented programming model? So in procedural-oriented programming, different programs will be, different function module will be stored in function group, right? In
Yes,
object-oriented
sir.
programming, instead of function group, class is the similar object to the function group, right? All the class methods will be placed in a class, inside a class, right? And again, we have
Yes,
two types of classes, global class and local class. Local class is just like subroutines. Local classes we can implement in the program level and we can only reuse within the program. It cannot be accessible to the other program, the local class. But if you create a global class, that is just like function module. You can call it in any program. Okay. So what is the transaction code to create a class method? SC24 is the transaction code to create the global class. For local class, you are going to implement it in the program only. But to create a global class, we need to do that in SC24 transaction code, right?
okay, sir.
Go to SC24. We'll implement same functionality, whatever the functionality we implemented in the
Function.
function module, right?
Function.
So here
Yes.
we implement a class method. Going forward, for every program, we are going to create a class method and we are going to implement all the validations and data selections inside the class method. Okay. For example, here what is the input? Company code, right? Company code is
Yes,
the
sir.
input here. We'll we'll add a validation also here with the help of class method. Okay.
Okay, sir. Gotcha.
So this is the transaction code SC24. So we'll create one class zdemo underscore. Okay. view data. Create the class. Here observe, we have two types of options, class and interface. What is the difference between class and interface? Class contains methods with implementation. With implementation means with source code. What is interface? Interface contains methods without any implementation. There will be no source code available. They just maintain importing and exporting parameters inside the interface methods. What is the use of these interface methods? You can implement okay, this interface method as per your requirement. So by using interfaces we can achieve polymorphism. So we'll discuss interfaces in details later. Okay, but for now class contains methods with implementation. It is very important interview question also. What is the difference between class and a interface? Class contains methods with implementation. What is interface?
Methods
Without any
without
implementation. We
implementation.
just have some importing and exporting parameters and empty methods. There is no code in it. Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
How to implement an interface method? How to implement an interface method? We can implement an interface method with the help of another class. Okay. We cannot directly implement the interface methods. We can implement the interface methods with the help of another class. Okay. Click on enter. So provide the description. So provide the description. And we have different options here. For now, just select usual ABAP class. You don't need to select, by default it will be selected. So here we have one important option, that is final. That is final. What do you mean by final? If this is selected, this is not suitable for inheritance. If you don't want inheritance for this class, okay, we can use the checkbox final. But if you need to allow inheritance for this class method, what you have to do, you have to remove this final checkbox. Okay. If you use this final checkbox, this is not going to support inheritance. The subclasses cannot inherit any of these methods and attributes, right? Clear? So for now I'm using final only. You can change it later if you want. Now, so what are the options? We have properties, interfaces. If you want to, so I told you, right? How can you implement an interface?
by using class method.
By using another class, right? So if you want to
Yeah.
Yes,
implement
sir.
interface, you have to add that interface here. You have to add that interface name in the this class, and you can implement those methods. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So we'll discuss few important options now. Once you are familiar with the options, we'll go in detail. So for now, we'll use only attributes and methods. Okay. So what is attribute? Attribute data can be accessible to all the class methods. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Methods. In methods, we define the methods. For example, I need a method to validate the company code. I'll write a method. Validate bookers. What is the type of the method? Here we have two types, instance method and static method. Okay, instance method and static method. What is instance method? For instance method, we need to create an object to call the method. Okay, we need to create the object to call the method. So every object will have its own instance at its own memory. You can create multiple instances for the same class method. But if you are using a function module, there is only single instance. There is a global memory. But here, every instance is different when you are using instance method. Okay. So click on this. For now, we'll use instance methods only. Visibility. Visibility is nothing but access specifiers. Is it a public, protected, or private method? So I told you, right, public methods can be accessible to the outside classes if you are using inheritance or anything. Okay. Protected method is available for only subclasses of this class. Private classes, private methods only local to the same
Only
class.
the class.
For example, I am using public. Provide the description. So we just define the method. We need importing and exporting parameters, right? For a method. Click on the method name. Go to parameters. Click on parameters. What is the input required to validate the company code? Company code, right? So this is
Yes, sir.
so for example, first we need a importing parameter. That is, I'll take like this. IM underscore bookers.
Bookers.
What is the type of the parameter, importing or exporting?
Importing.
Importing parameter. Select the importing parameter. Is it an optional parameter or mandatory parameter? If it is optional, select optional.
Mandatory.
Okay. Type,
Yes,
data element.
bookers.
Okay.
Setup share company.
So we have input. What is the output? We need to know whether it is a valid value or not, right? For
Yes,
example, which one I'll take? I'll take subarc value. You can take anyone. You can also take company code also. Exporting. This is the output. What is the type? Type is sy-subarc. You can return 0, 0 to 0 for success and not equal to 0 for any other value. Okay. by using this. Go to methods, double click on the method. We are done with importing and exporting, input and output for this validation method. So what we have to write here? Here, this is the importing parameter, im underscore bookers. This is the exporting parameter, that is output parameter. So we'll take input from bookers. Select
Single.
what is the what table we have to use here to validate the company code.
T001.
Check
So
table.
yeah, we have to use check table to validate the company code. That is T001, where bookers equal to
Bookers. IM underscore bookers.
okay.
Yes. Into
If sy hyphen sub
Sabasi.
rc equal to 0 or else if it is not equal to 0.
Okay, sir.
We have two
And
possibilities. If it is equal to 0, we have to return the output, right? What is our output here?
yes,
Our
sir.
output, our
Yes,
output is also a
sir.
sub rc value. We are
Sabasi.
returning sub rc value to the calling program,
And
As well and
whatever the
Sabasi.
value. If it is 0, pass the 0 value or just return. Even you don't need to check anything here. If it is 0 or
Okay,
0,
sir.
whatever the value in sub rc, that will be moved to exporting parameter, right? You don't need to use condition. Let pass whatever the value we have in sub rc. We'll handle that in a calling program. Depends on the sub rc value, right? If it is 0,
Yes, sir.
we'll raise some error message. If it is not if it is not equal to 0, we'll raise some error message, right? Save.
Yes, sir.
Nothing new here. The programming and everything is same. Only we are writing in a different layout. That is SC24, right? Activate C. If you want to activate this method, right? When you click on activate, please observe. This is the class you have to created. You have to select this class object also. ZDemo PO data class also along with the method names. Okay, you can continue. Okay, escape is missing. So I did not select the class. We'll activate it in the next screen. For now, just activate the method. So the method is activated. Go to the class. So one method is completed. What is the another functionality we need? We need another method to get the business logic, right? To get the data, right? So
Yes, sir.
earlier we implemented a function module. Instead of function module, we'll use a class here. Okay. For this function module, company code is the input and returning purchase order data by joining multiple tables. For that we have already created a structure with the
Structure.
required fields, and for the structure we created a table type to define it as an internal table like structure and exporting parameter, because we are returning multiple records, right? So
Yes, sir.
implement read po underscore data. So what is the type of the method? Instance method. For the instance methods we have to create a object. Next, what is the next step? Define the parameters, importing, exporting parameters. So what is the input for this method? What is the input for this method? We are taking company code, right? As the importing
Yes,
parameter.
sir.
Yes.
Just a naming convention, okay? IM means importing. What is the type? Importing.
Import.
Associated type is brokers only.
Focus.
So what is the output? Output is PO data, right? With required fields. I've already created
Yes.
a structure with required fields, and I have created a table type. Okay.
Yes,
And
sir.
also we have another alternative here. We can use type structure. You don't need to create a structure to define the uh, importing and exporting parameters. You can also use type structures by creating type structures here in the class method. I'll show you in the next session. So is it a single record? We are returning multiple records, right? For example, et underscore PO data,
Import.
exporting.
Exporting.
What is the type? Type you have to take this table type name. If you
Jet.
take structure,
None.
Name.
it can return only single record. If you take table type, it can return multiple records.
Multiple records.
Now we have our importing exporting parameter, right? So what is the next step? Simple, right?
Yes, sir.
If sy hyphen sub rc equal to 0. So this logic, right? We implemented in the function module. It is the same logic. If you are not clear, please refer the function module video. Okay? Please refer the function module video. This is the same join. It's a simple inner join. So if it is successful, then return the data to the exporting parameter. How can you do that? et underscore PO data equal to
IT underscore.
IT underscore pivot data.
what is the mandatory rule here? Both internal
Same
tables
type.
should be of
Same
same
type.
type, same type. How can you make sure that both are same type? The number of fields in the select statement and number of fields in the structure should be same,
Should be
and the
same.
order also should be same. Okay, then we can say
Yes,
that
sir.
so both are referring to the same type. Activate the method. Here you can directly use exporting parameter. You don't need to define a separate internal table actually. You can
Yes, sir.
directly use this exporting parameter, this internal table like structure, right? You can
Yes,
directly
sir.
use this et underscore po data here
Instead
instead of a
of
new internal
instead
table.
of
Then you
data.
don't need to pass it like this. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And commas also remove this. So,
Right. You don't need to use inline declaration. You have to remove commas and everything. Or if you want to follow inline declaration, you can just add at the rate symbol instead of data. Just add at the rate symbol, just like this. Right?
yes, sir.
So we have created two methods, one class for the program. So in general, in every project, what they will do, they'll create one class. Whenever they have a development, they'll create one class and they are going to implement all the methods in that class. Okay? And we are going to call that class in our program. So you can also use like this. Okay? But what is the mandatory rule? The fields in that exporting parameter structure and the fields what are we selecting in the select statement in the should be in the same
Same
order.
order.
Otherwise, data will be mismatched. Okay? Sometimes it won't
Yes,
show
sir.
any error, but EBLN data will be placed in company code and company code data will be placed in EBLN. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we are done with the class methods. We'll call it in the program. Now, so these two are the methods of this class, right? Both are instance methods. So if you want to define attribute, you can define like this, just like internal table or work area or variable like structure. Okay. Uh, for example, instance attribute. So you can define three types of attributes. So please make a note. Okay. So these are all interview questions. What are the different types of attributes? We have instance attribute, static attribute, and constant. You know what is constant, right? You cannot change the value. Visibility is public, private, and protect. What is the type? I'll take EKKO. So now I can store EKKO table data in this attribute so that all the methods of this class can access that attribute data. Okay, whenever required. But in our current requirement, there is no use of this attribute in our program. Okay, so we just define like that. Clear? Any doubts in creating class methods? And what do you mean by implementation? Earlier I told you, right? Interface method doesn't contain any implementation.
Without code.
Interfaces contains methods
Yes, sir.
very without implementation. What do you mean by implementation? Implementation is nothing but writing source code. Okay?
Yes, sir.
By just
So
defining
it means
import.
in function model we have source code that is different.
We are using the same code here. But here we are not using exceptions, what we are using in function module, but we have different concept for exception handling here. Okay? We'll see that in the later sessions.
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by implementation? Implementation is nothing but double click on that method and writing the source code. Okay? If you just define the importing and exporting parameters, that doesn't mean that you implemented the class method. You defined it. Okay? Implementing means writing the source code.
Source code.
If you go to the interface, you cannot find any source code here. That method just contain importing and exporting parameters. Right?
Oh, yes, sir.
Now, we're done with the class methods. Now let's see how to use these class methods in our program. Okay? We'll use the same program. Instead of function module, I'm changing the program, or we'll just copy this program. We'll copy this program into another program. Oh, sorry, it's a function module, right? Go back to the program. This is the program, right? PO data report. Click on Control Y and copy this. So, copy this program. Using class, I'm using a different name. Copy all, select all. Save the program. Now, I'm removing the function module call here. Or I'll just comment it using control left arrow. Okay? The rest of the things are as it is. Now, what is the requirement here to call a class method? What is the type of this method? Is it an instance method or static method?
Instance method.
Instance method, right? For instance methods, we have to create a object. With the help of that object, we can call the method. How to call a static method? So this is the perfect example for static method. You don't need to create an object for static class methods. This is the class name. CLDemo output is the class name, and display is the method. You can call the method using this arrow mark. Okay? And pass the importing parameter here. So this is the static method, example for static method. Okay, you don't need to create an object for static method. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So I've commented it. So we need to create an object, right? First, to define the object.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
How to define an object? Data. We'll use some name. Name might be okay. We'll use LV underscore OBJ or any name, any relevant name. Okay. Type ref2. What we need to use? We need to use class name. Okay. We define the object. We define the object. What is the next step? First, we'll call the validation method. We have implemented a validation method, right? To validate the company
Yes,
code. We'll call that in net selection screen event. What is the event to validate the selection screen inputs?
Right, sir.
Net selection screen. That's why we have to call that method here. Before calling, what is the mandatory requirement? You have to create that object. Create object and the object name. Provide the object name. So I've created the object. I've defined the object and I've created the object. Next, what is the next step? Call the method. Go to, remember the object name, LO underscore OBJ, right?
okay, sir.
Go to pattern. Here, to call the function module, you need to select this. For to call the class method, select ABAP object pattern. ABAP object patterns. Click on continue. So instance means object name. Use the class. Method means
Instance.
select the method what you have created. So what is the method? Validate company code, right? Select.
Validate company.
So for this, what is the importing parameter? Pass the company code as importing parameter. That is, so you should place create object before the class method. And enable the importing. Pass, what is the parameter? P underscore focus, right?
Yes, sir.
What is the output? Sub RC value, right?
Yes, sir.
So there is one difference. Here we are using for to return the importing data. What we are doing, we are defining the work area and internal table, right? Separately. But in class methods, you can use inline declarations at the rate LV underscore sub. You can create or you can define the inline objects using inline declarations. Okay. But it is not possible in function modules. Okay.
Okay, sir.
We are passing company code as input and returning the sub RC value if LV underscore sub RC equal to 0. No, we need to know nothing. It is valid. Sub RC equal to 0 means valid only, right? Not equal to 0. Message.
Message.
Now you can call this particular method in any program wherever you need to validate the company code. Okay. You can
Okay,
call
sir.
it in any
Sir, create
program.
object uh, LO underscore object is enough, sir, to
Huh.
call an object or another program.
You have to define object there only. Define the object, create the object, and call this method. Okay. You should create the object, and you should define the object, and you should create the object and call the method. Okay. So you can call this method in any function module, any program, or anywhere, wherever you need to validate this company code. So what is the input for this method? Company code. What is the output?
Company code.
Sub-RC value.
Suppose.
It depends. Okay. You can use any output. You can return company code also, or you can return any complete company code record. It depends on your requirement. Okay. Now let's call the another method. Do we need to create the object again to call the another method? This is to select the business functionality, right? Do we need to call the object again or not? So we don't need to create the object again. Once the object is created, you don't need to create the object again. Okay. Just call the method, go to pattern, select the ABAP object pattern, continue, enter the object name, class name, and select the method. This is right, read PO data.
Read and
Continue. Okay. So what is the input for this? Company code only, right? Pass the company code value. Okay, you can directly pass the parameter, or since we are copying parameter value into variable, you can also use this one. Anything is possible. Okay. Now tell me, do we need to use do we need to define these internal tables and work areas to return the data in program, calling program? Here you no need. You can simply use inline declaration lt underscore output, for example, and you can use this in your ALV grid display. But you have to build the field catalog. Don't forget, you have to build field catalog for all the fields of this data. Okay, whatever the fields we are returning, right? Whatever the fields we have in ET underscore PO data, you have to build field catalog. Otherwise, use the structure name if there is a structure available. Here in this program, I am using structure name, but when you are creating the program, don't use structure name, use field catalog. Okay. The rest of the options are same. Instead of structure name, build the first build the field catalog and pass the field catalog internal table here. Clear? So this is the data I have for that particular company code, right? Are you able to follow? Are you able to follow this? Is everyone clear on creating class methods? Please respond.
Yes, sir,
Yes,
but it
sir.
will be confused.
No, what is it?
Little bit confusing, sir.
Where is it? Where is it?
After practicing with it.
Sorry?
అంటే సార్ మీరు చెప్తుంటే అర్థమైనట్లు అనిపిస్తుంది సార్ వన్స్
No, no. Where are you
ప్రాక్టీస్ చేస్తే
confusing? Where are you confusing? Is it defining importing exporting parameter, or is it calling the class method in the program? Or where are you
ఇన్ కాల్
confusing?
ఇన్ కాలింగ్ సార్
Calling, what is there in calling? Create the object. First define the object using the statement, data statement, object name, type ref to class name. And then what is the next step? Create the object
క్రియేట్ ఆబ్జెక్ట్
using create object
Yes, sir.
object name and call your method. Go to pattern. Here select ABAP object pattern. Click on continue and enter the object name, class name, and select the your method. Rest of the things are same like function module. Here only the additional thing is we are defining a object and creating the object. Okay. Instead of this, you can also use inline declaration to define the object like this. Data of simple way of defining LO underscore obj equal to new. What is the class name?
Set underscore p underscore data. Parenthesis.
I'll tell you one simple difference. Earlier, where did I define it? So let me comment this. So did I get a error earlier when I created the object in edge selection screen?
No, sir.
Now I am
Awesome.
getting the error because in start of selection it is saying that LO underscore obj is not available, unknown. But I have created the object here, right?
Yes, sir.
But I have created the object here. Where did I define it? I defined and created in the edge selection screen event itself, right?
Yes, sir.
So using
Yes,
inline
sir.
declaration, I am defining it and I am creating it in the same line in the edge selection screen event. So whatever the variable, whatever the data object defined in this event is not accessible in another event, right? That's why it is saying
Yes,
it is
sir.
unknown. So I defined this data object or object in edge selection screen and that is not accessible here. If I define it here, if I define the data object here, is it accessible to the all events or not? So if
Yes,
I
sir.
define
Accessible,
it at the
sir.
top, this object can be accessible by the all events. That's why we call it as global data section. This is global data section. All these data objects will be accessible throughout all the events. But if you define in a specific event that is not accessible to the outside event, that is start of selection. Okay. That's why I
Okay,
have
sir.
to, I have to create and define here. Okay. For example, let me try to place it here. Do I have any error now?
No,
No,
sir.
sir.
Because this is accessible. This is a global data object. We
Global.
call it as global data object. This is accessible for the all events, right? Clear?
Sir, in startup selection also we can create and we can define also at selection screen also. If two times or can be used, it will be accessible, sir.
Yes, you have to define it 2 times for each event. You're calling same class method, right? In 2 different events. Class is same, but
Yes,
different
sir.
method. You have to create
Yes, sir.
object 2 times. Okay? In 2 different events. If you are using inline declaration.
When okay, sir.
If
But
you
when we are defining in
global,
global declarations, there is no need.
no need. This will be accessible to all the program events.
Okay, sir.
Even it is the concept is same with the variables, work areas, and internal tables and data objects. This is global data. So the data, whatever the data inside this data objects, right, accessible throughout all the events. Okay. Now, so any questions? This is how we define object using inline declaration. Simple, right? Data, object name, new, class name. That's it. Clear? So we have a concept called constructor. Okay. We'll discuss that in the next session. Constructor is also a method, special method. Constructor is a special method. When that constructor method will execute, do we need to call the constructor method in the program? The constructor is a special method which executes automatically when you create an object of the class. It is very important interview question and very important concept also. So in class methods, we have a concept called constructors, right? The name of the method should be always constructor. You cannot use
Yes.
any other name. The constructor method name should be always constructor only. So you see, when I entered the method name, it is automatically populated with this symbol. This is constructor symbol. Method type is constructor. This is a constructor method. The name should be constructor. It is very important interview question. Please make a note. So what is the use of constructor method? So constructor method will be automatically execute when you create the object for the class. You don't need to call it. Okay? Clear? So when we use constructor methods, so whenever we need to populate some default values, we use constructor method. Okay? So this can contain importing and exporting parameters. Sorry, only importing parameters. Constructor methods cannot have exporting parameters. So we can define the importing parameters. What are the types available? Let's just check. Sorry, this is associated type, right? Yeah, here we have only, see, here we don't have even option to select the type of the parameter because by default it is importing parameter only, right? There is no export. It won't return any data, just like methods. It will just accept the input. So what is a constructor? Please make a note. Constructor is a special method which executes automatically when you create an object for the class, right? So what is the use of constructor? Constructor is used to set global data for the class or default values which we are going to use in the class. Okay? Clear? So constructor can have only importing parameters. It won't have any exporting parameter. It won't return any data, any output. Okay? The name of the constructor method should be constructor only. You cannot use any other name as constructor method. Okay? Clear? For example,
Yes, sir.
now we'll implement the constructor method. I'm not going to use any importing or exporting parameter. I will use company code as importing parameter. We have an attribute, right? We defined one attribute, right? What
Yes,
is
sir.
that attribute? Even we are not using it, just for example purpose I defined it, I underscore EKKO, right? We'll do one thing. What is the type? EKKO. Okay, complete table type. We'll do one thing. We'll populate some data to this attribute inside the constructor method. Okay,
Yes, sir.
copy the attribute. For example, I'll take this LT underscore EKKO. The attribute name is LT underscore EKKO. So rename it. Go to methods. Double click on the constructor method. So I'm not defining any importing parameter. We'll just write some code. Okay. So if you have any importing parameter, for example, let's say there is an importing parameter for the constructor. How can you pass it? Like this. Like this, you can pass the importing parameter for the constructor method. You don't need to mention the method name. Okay. So which one is easy for you? Is it creating object using inline declaration or defining it and creating it? Which one is easy?
Inline declaration, sir.
Yeah. Please
Because when
remember,
we forgot to,
you have to create object in each event. Okay. If you are calling the class method in a separate event, again, please create the object. Otherwise, keep it in the global data section. Then you don't need to create object again and again. Okay.
yes, sir.
Because for example, you define constructor here and created the object here. And also you have to create object here also in startup selection also. Because it's a different event, right?
Yes, sir.
Clear?
So constructor also we can define in global declarations.
Constructor. Why we are defining the constructor here?
I mean importing parameters, sir.
So we don't have, we did not define any importing parameters. If you want importing parameter, you can define it like this. For example, im underscore bookers
Yes.
type Bookers.
Lucas.
It contains only importing, no exporting. Okay. For
Yes,
constructor
sir.
method, double click on it. To implement the constructor method, double click on it. We just define the method. We did not implement it. To implement the method, double click on it. So now write the code. What is our requirement? We thought of populating the attribute data, right? Select star from. What is the type of that attribute? Type EKKO, right?
Yes.
Is it a single work area like structure or internal table like structure?
Internal table.
Okay, how can you say that it's internal table like structure? Go and check attributes. So is it internal table like structure or work area like structure? Tell me, what is the type of this LT underscore EKKO? Can it accept only single record or multiple records?
It can access
Multiple records.
Multiple records. How we are able to say?
in SSL
Add
type.
Sorry, what is it? So you are saying that it can accept multiple records based on what you are able to analyze, and you are able to say that this can accept multiple records. What is this type? Is it a table type or table?
Table.
table, sir.
Table. When we define importing parameters, exporting parameters with only table name, how is going to behave? Is it like a work area like structure or table like structure?
Table like structure.
So then you don't understand anything about function modules. And even I've repeatedly telling you that whenever we define an object with the help of table name or structure name, it's just a work area like structure. So then why we created table type? Can someone tell me why we created the table type? We created table type to define the internal table like structures,
Table like structure.
right?
Yes, sir. Yes, table and reference, table name and reference will acts like a work area like structure.
So to define internal table like structure, we need a table type. Okay,
Yes, sir.
please remember.
Yes, sir.
So
Okay, sir.
this will
Sorry.
be a work area like structure, not internal table like structure. So what is the possible code I can write here in the constructor method? I can select only single record, right? Select single star from into ls underscore ekko. This is attribute name where bookers equal to im underscore bookers. This is the importing parameter name. Visibility of the constructor cannot be more specific than the visibility of the instance creator. Okay. So the constructor visibility is private and we are trying to populate data. So make it public. Activate. So it is activated. Now what you need to do when you are creating the object. So what is the parameter you have in constructor? Is it optional parameter or mandatory parameter? What is the importing parameter you have in constructor method? Is it a optional parameter or mandatory parameter? Are you guys able to see my screen or not?
Yes, sir.
So then what is the type of parameter? Is it optional or mandatory for this constructor method?
Mandatory, sir.
Can you guys see any checkbox for optional here?
Uh,
No, right?
no,
It's a
sir.
mandatory parameter. Then whenever you are calling this constructor method in your program, what you need to do? It is mandatory to pass whenever you are creating an object. It is mandatory to pass the
Parent,
input
important.
importing parameter whenever you are like this. If you have multiple space, one more space or comma, I think. Okay. Clear? It is mandatory to pass the importing parameter. The constructor importing parameter is mandatory. Otherwise, leave it blank. There's nothing new here. We are just writing code in a different application, that is SC24. The rest of the concepts are same. Now activate your program. Please remember, going forward, you should write all your programs using class methods only. I should not see any code inside the program. Everything should be in a class method, including validations and data selections. Everything. Okay? So let's keep a breakpoint here. One here and another one is here. Execute. So what is the event that is executed before go to selection, startup selection? At selection screen event, right? What is the use of this event?
Validation, sir.
Validating the selection screen inputs.
Selection screen inputs.
So now it is creating the object, right? Click on F5. Click on F5. Where should it navigate to? It is navigated to constructor method. Please observe.
Constructor is.
Because the constructor method will be automatically execute when you are creating an object for the class. So it is populating data to that attribute ls_ekko. So now whatever the data inside this attribute is accessible to all the methods of the same class. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So object created. Now method is executing. Validate bookers. What is the sub RC? Sub RC equal to 0. Then we are passing
0.
as it is. Sub RC to,
Is.
for example, if it is not equal to 0, if it is failed, this will contain a different value. Completed.
Yes, sir.
Now it should go to Now it should go to startup selection. Now click on F5. Again, it is executing the constructor method because we are creating the object again, right?
Yes, sir.
We got the output, that is 5 records, and we are using ALB output to display the records. That's it, right?
Yes, sir.
Is everyone clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.